Perfect. Hello there, everybody, and welcome to Local Plan Working Group for Tuesday, the 15th of April. We don't have any members of the public here in the gallery, so we'll skip the usual formalities, and I'll just remind you to turn your microphones on when you're talking. We'll move straight on into the items. Item one is apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Councillor Coles, Councillor Avilius and Councillor Smalley. We've got two substitutes, Councillor Kent for Councillor Coles and Councillor Whitcroft for Councillor Avilius. So, welcome. Item two is declarations of interest. Do you know any declaration? Yeah, Councillor Pavlovich, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as the executive member for the local plan, effectively agenda item 5, you're scrutinising my report. So I don't know whether you feel that that is too much of a conflict, in which case I'll sit out on that one. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue.
Yeah, I see it as valuable input, but that's
fine.
We've got item 3. I'm not seeing it with declaration of interest, so that's fine. We've got item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have anything they want to raise on this? Are we happy to take that as being approved? I'm not seeing any answers, so we'll take that as being approved as they are. And item 4, we don't have anyone speaking in public participation. Someone was coming to come, but they were now ill, so I'm sure you'll have seen an email circulated to them, so there's no one to speak today. Item 5, we'll move on, is the local development scheme. I'll hand over to officers Alison Cook and Alison Stockdale and John Roberts to take us through the paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the local development scheme that we're presenting, it's a statutory document that we must produce as part of the planning authority to set out how we're going about plan making over the course of the future for all different types of plan that we're producing. So within the paper, we've set out how we've got to sort of local plan adoption this February and how we're continuing with the implementation activity to do with this adopted plan. We've set out a new timetable for plan making for a local plan indicatively from next summer using the indicative timescales that the government have released. And then we've set out timescales for the supplementary planning documents, for the community infrastructure levy, and also the neighbourhood plans. We've been asked to produce an up-to-date local development scheme by the government. So the government released a new national planning policy framework in December 2024. And as part of that release, they asked that that authorities updated their LDS and submitted it to them for their interest to understand where people are in their plan making progress. We would be submitting following executive decision. So we're asking the working group to recommend to executive how to proceed with their decision, and following that following that executive decision, we'll be submitting that back to the government so that it sets our formal record of plan making on this basis. We have said that this is an interim local development scheme at the moment, so indicatively setting out our timescales. As you can appreciate, we've just, and as all of you know, we've just adopted our new local plan, and that implementation phase is really important to make sure that we can move forward with the resources and capacity we have to deliver the decisions on supplementary planning documents and the community infrastructure levy, and continue with our neighbourhood planning progress, etc. We also are waiting updates from the government in relation to the legislation that supports new plan making. So in terms of how we progress and the timescales moving forward and the intricacies of that, we're expecting new legislation to be published this summer. We're also expecting a new consultation on national development management policies, which will also affect plan making in terms of how we proceed with different levels of policy in our plan in the future. So all of that together, at this stage, we thought it would be best to update the local development scheme in line with our statutory duty, present it as interim at this stage, and we intend to bring back a further local development scheme later in the year, setting out our future plan making timetable supported by a resource plan, making use of anything that we understand from those consultations and the legislation released in the summer. We have circulated a short addendum to this paper. So Annex B sets out the local development scheme as presented. The addendum that we've circulated around for members just covers the response from the government that's come out in some key points that how they're moving forward. I'm just going to pass over to Alison to summarise some of the key points for you.
Hello, I'm just going to summarise this addendum that we've circulated. So February, the government produced their response to the consultation that the previous government carried out on the new plan making system. So that was back in July to October 2023, when we submitted comments to the previous government about their proposed review of the plan making system. So the kind of high level stuff was secured in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. And we're now looking at regulations to provide more detail on that. So the paper just goes through the consultation response, summarising, and the consultation response summarised everybody's comments. About 500 different bodies responded to that consultation. So I think main points that came out of the government's response to the consultation was they're not looking to change the timetable that was initially proposed. So it would be a 30-month local plan timetable from the point where we notify that we're starting the process. There is a kind of prior period that I think we've discussed in the LDS, the local development scheme. But once we tell them that we're starting the process, the intention is that we get to an adopted plan within 30 months. That includes a 6-month period for examination with potential to extend slightly if modifications are required that require further consultation. Going on, other more important issues that came out of the consultation response. So they talked and asked about gateway assessments. So there would be kind of points where you had to provide certain evidence, certain documentation, and effectively pass those before you could progress to ensure that you were going to meet the 30-month deadline. There will be 3 of those. The first one will be a kind of self-assessment with effectively a form, a standardised form, and then 2 further assessments through the plan period that will involve the planning inspectorate. So those will be mandatory information. I think the idea is that it's much more standardised process with a clearer idea of what kind of documentation, what needs to be provided at every point. There will, as was previously mooted, there'll be 2 periods of community engagement consultation through the 30 months. And this will be set out as part of a PID, and I've forgotten entirely what PID stands for.
A project initiation document.
That's the one. So the PID will be agreed, obviously, early on, and then you'll be held to this through the process. An initial 6 weeks consultation, and then the second gateway after the 6 weeks consultation, then an 8-week consultation followed by the third gateway, and then the examination period. The other thing, probably the other main thing that came in the consultation response was confirmation that supplementary plans, so instead of supplementary planning documents, SPDs, they will effectively go. There'll be a transitional period for the existing ones, but we're then moving to supplementary plans, which are slightly different thing in that they're site specific, more around probably master planning sites of a single site, or maybe 2 or more sites that are nearby to each other, or potentially might have similar issues. But there'll be a slightly different process with some independent examination, so slightly different to our current SPD process. I think that was the main issues that came out of it, but everything's summarised in the addendum we circulated.
Thanks. I'll invite questions to officers if anyone if they want to raise. Yeah, Councillor Eyre, if you want to start us off.
Thank you, Chair. And the addendum is really helpful. I was trying to find that all day, and that's given me the information that I've been trying to hunt without trying to find it. So the guidance is quite clear, 30 months to deliver this. We are waiting 5 months prior to even starting, so we're actually delivering it in 34, 35 months. How strong is our position in terms of defending why we're not starting until the 1st of August? I mean, because that has massive implications for the timeline all the way through.
So our plan is adopted and can be implemented. Technically, we're in a 5-year review period for our adopted plan, so we don't have to start plan making straight away. The reason we've indicated that point in time is because the critically for us, the new standard housing method starts to apply from July next year, which will affect how we deal with 5-year housing land supply for the authority. So in our view, it would make sense for us to start plan making at that point to try and plan for how we're going to deal with the new needs. And I mean needs in terms of housing needs, employment needs, health needs, all infrastructure needs from that point to take on board, so we can bring a plan into fruition quickly.
So that's what led you to August. The changes in July lead you to start, because you could start in July.
It's the 26th of July, I think, that it's implemented from in terms of the legislation. But I'm happy to consider alternative timetables subject to the committee.
Thanks, that's helpful. We've got Councillor Orrell next.
Thank you, Derek. Some comments and questions about neighbourhood plans and the potential for reviews. I can only speak for Huntington, but I doubt whether there'll be any appetite for a review of the neighbourhood plan there. Reason: councillors, parish councillors, and members of the public spent a number of years and a lot of time developing our neighbourhood plan. There was financial help, but there was still a cost to the parish council. The plan designated land for nearly 1,000 houses, which, coupled with recent developments, means the number of properties for our area will increase by 25%. To say there is disappointment with what happened since then would be an understatement. First, a planning inspector and the Secretary of State disregarded the plan with a development on New Lane. Second, our planning committee disregarded the neighbourhood plan for a further application on New Lane. And even for the development for 970 houses supported by the neighbourhood plan, ward councillors, local residents, the planning inspector ignored the parish, ward councillors and local people in relation to the access to the development. Not surprisingly, our parish councillor is saying, why did we bother doing a neighbourhood plan? So, Chair, some questions. If a review does not happen, will the neighbourhood plan continue to carry some weight, even though it's not very much? Secondly, will the costs of any review be paid for? And finally, the report doesn't give a timescale. Can we get clarification on when this is required? Thank you, Chair.
I would still very much advocate the production of neighbourhood plans. They're very important to set local level policy, and they, in our opinion, they have significant weight in the planning system. They form part of our development plan. I can't comment on individual cases, as I'm sure you appreciate, in terms of what's been through planning. But certainly in terms of the way that we're working with neighbourhood plans at the moment, we're making sure that they include relevant policies, are able to shape any development that comes forward, and conserve anything in the neighbourhood area that they wish to look at, such as local green space. In terms of weight, they will continue to have significant weight as part of the development plan when they're adopted. There may be some policies, so some of the adopted neighbourhood plans that we have greenbelt policies as interim policies ahead of adoption of the plan. Those policies will obviously be superseded by the local plan policy and the greenbelt that we have adopted. And we'll be making that clear, and we want to work with the neighbourhood plans that have already been produced to work through those policies and make sure it's clear in terms of how the adopted plan affects those plans. Neighbourhood plans, similarly to local plans, my understanding is that they should be preferably reviewed. So the longer that from their production date to when they are, to now, if it's, if we're getting into 10 years, it may be that a short review would be helpful to make sure that it is kept up to date and necessary against national level policy, which keeps changing as well. And we will certainly support any neighbourhood plans of parishes or neighbourhood forums that want to come forward to do that process. In terms of costs of review, again, I can't answer that question. I think that's either a question for finance. At the moment, we provide a grant to some neighbourhood plans to start their neighbourhood planning process and contribute to their costs of production. There are numbers of finances that can be applied for through national level support, so through locality that they can apply for. And I don't know whether or not that responds also to reviews, but that's something that I could certainly take away and clarify in terms of guidance on our website as well.
Are those national income streams still available?
To our knowledge, they're still available. And the grant is for planned production, but also the supporting documents, because they still have to go through the legal documentation. So at the moment, sustainability appraisals, habitat regulation assessments, etc., to make sure they're compliant with those legislative parts of the statutory framework.
And when would you expect the neighbourhood plan to be reviewed? At what time scale? I
think it would be helpful before the 5-year plan date for us to certainly work through the plan and make sure that the policies are still up to date, and where if there's any significant change against those policies, where we would need to look at those and discuss how we would apply them in context of the national policy or how our local policy was developing.
Thanks. Is that a supplementary? They both Councillor Pavlovich first, and I'll come to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. And whilst obviously I can't speak for Huntington, as part of my role on the Parish Council liaison, I have been talking with a number of the parish councils who are intending to review at the same time as the local plan is reviewed, which makes absolute sense.
Thanks. And Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the topic of neighbourhood plans, I represent a ward that doesn't have a parish council, as many of us do. And I just want to understand, would that at all impact the process of assessing neighbourhood plans or establishing them under this system? If there is an established parish council to go to, would you engage, for example, with community groups or work to make sure we have a local consensus in the absence of a parish council?
Yes, absolutely. I'm looking to Alison. Alison's been dealing with local neighbourhood plans. In terms of that, we would look at a neighbourhood forum for the area. So they would need to have a set number of people that are committed and lined up as a forum for that area. We would go through the same process of an application process, but we'd also go through the process of setting that forum formally. We would go out to consultation. So we'd bring back to the group that constitution of the forum, who was on that, and the area boundary, and we consult on both of those things and then seek to ratify that formally. So any area can come forward. Similarly to, for a good example, is the Minster precinct. So the Minster precinct is a non-parished area. We've had a individually designated area for that neighbourhood plan. And there is a forum that sits behind that informs on decisions and plan making.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, yeah.
Just briefly, would a neighbourhood forum be the same thing as a planning panel, or would there be a distinction there? Because we do have a local planning panel.
I think that the neighbourhood forum has a specific makeup and needs to consist of residents and people of a commercial interest in that area, in that location. So perhaps not, but it would depend perhaps on your planning panel. Does that sound?
Yeah, thanks. Was that a supplementary, Councillor Stewart? Oh, yeah, if you want to go now, and then we'll go to you next. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let's go, Councillor Stewart first.
Sorry, thank you. Just if you review the neighbourhood plan, presumably it's not subject to another vote, is the first question, or is it? And the second question is, as a neighbourhood plan gets older, is it effectively becoming less relevant time-wise, or is it only becoming less relevant insofar as policies change a bit, so they clash a bit? Is time irrelevant? It's just all the policy side, or is it a bit of both?
Taking the last question first, I think it's a little bit of both, but the relevance of it against policy, I think, would be more significant in this instance. A lot of our neighbourhood plans are focusing on, for example, design issues or conservation of areas that they feel are important, or identifying, for example, local parades for retail and things like that. So as those change, we need to make sure that's kept up to date. But otherwise, policy remains as part of the development plan and with significant weight. The referendum. In terms of a vote, I actually am not sure if it has to go back to referendum. I don't think so. I think it still has to be made decision, and we still have to do public engagement, but it's a review of the plan against the referendum version of the plan, essentially. But I think we'd have to come back to clarify that, Councillor Stewart, if that's okay.
And Councillor Fisher, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I've long said that the absence of parish councils in the central area is a significant democratic deficit, or some equivalent body. Part of the problem that the central wards, like Councillor Whitcroft's ward, would face is the fact that where would the finance for it come from? Strensall spent £30,000 on our local plan in planning consultants' fees and getting maps prepared and so on. I think we got £6,000 total in funding from various bodies. So £24,000 had to be found. It came out of the parish precept or the parish reserves. How would that be tackled in an inner ward where there is no such equivalent funding?
Would you like to say anything on that? Oh, I guess it's a broader question than planning strategy, but if you want to say anything, then you're welcome. If not, then nothing.
I can't comment on financing for those unparished areas.
Perhaps, but you'll take my point that it's not going to be easy for inner city wards to produce without a parish council to provide the background funding. There's got to be some mechanism in place to help Fishergate and other wards in the city centre get their neighbourhood plans together.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Alison, please. Yeah.
So I can just come quickly back on the point about whether we need a referendum with a review, because I've just checked. It depends on the changes, basically. So, yeah, if it's sort of minor, non-material, factual stuff, they can just do that. If it's bigger changes, then they might need an examination, but not a referendum. And they might possibly need both the examination and the referendum, depending on the scale of change. So, yeah.
On that issue, who decides that?
I think it would probably be clear if they were small changes that didn't need to go further. I'm just trying to read it quickly. But I think the examiner might change. If it's larger changes that do need an examination, I think the examiner would point as to whether a referendum was then needed.
Okay, thanks. That's all very helpful. Councillor Taylor next. Cheers.
Thanks, Chair. My initial question was about neighbourhood plans, and the answers have mostly sort of addressed it. So I've sort of tweaked what my question was going to be. And that's to simply ask if there's any scope for providing all areas with a neighbourhood plan, if it's not already been done, if you like, a sort of service level agreement of the support that they'll get when it comes to reviews, and maybe even looking at increasing the support that areas with neighbourhood plans already get. And I acknowledge the support that the council already give to such areas, but they take such a heave of community effort to get these things up and running. And I imagine there'll be times when certain reviews will be a bit of a pain to get done. And I'm conscious also that over time, members of the community who move on in one sense or another, who may have been instrumental in setting up neighbourhood plans initially, they might not be there to keep them going. And it would be a shame if neighbourhood plans become irrelevant or faded because that initial support wasn't there to maintain that sort of activity in the community. And I know it's grey area and nuanced, but it's a little anxiety of mine. But I'm sure colleagues have a greater anxiety given that they represent areas with such plans.
If you'd like to say something, yeah.
Just to confirm that we have a statutory duty as a planning authority to support plan making for neighbourhood plans. So anyone that does approach us with an interest in neighbourhood plans, we must support them. And at the moment, that support primarily comes from the strategic planning policy team, so headed by myself and my colleagues. And we would do our best to support that in terms of plan making. I can't comment on finances, as I said, in terms of where that comes from. But certainly there's the statutory process in which neighbourhood plans have to come forward, and in terms of setting neighbourhood plans for across the city, we would still need that to be either put forward and agreed by being taken forward by parish or the neighbourhood forum that would be determined for that area managing that location. But we certainly have a statutory duty to support development.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Oh yeah, quick supplementary to that, if I may. And there might not be an appetite for this given how many other asks there are of officers' time, but curious to hear officers' views or even the committee's views as to whether there be legs in a recommendation that ask the executive to consider support above the statutory duty for neighbourhood plans that might need reviews in time, whatever above the statutory duty might look like. I know I'm banging on about it, but these things take such a huge effort to get up and running. It's one of the reasons why, dare I say, certain areas of the city don't have them. It's not just about not having parish councils, there's socio-economic sort of trends too. I'd just be interested to see if there was any scope to improve the support they already get. But if it's not got legs, I won't keep banging on about it. It's the last thing I'll say.
I think it's an unusual one with local plan working group, and it's never quite clear what the terms of reference for the group are and if we can make recommendations like this in it. I think it's an interesting discussion that this has created, and I wonder if there's a case for taking it away and identifying which forums best to discuss that specific piece about where neighbourhood plans are developed and where that is discussed properly. So I think it's worth noting it in the minutes for sure, and we take it offline and work out how we actually make that happen. But that's partly because of my uncertainty about what exactly the local plan working group stands for, which we're going to pick up at the end of next over business anyway.
Chair, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Stewart, I have a supplementary.
Yeah, it's just absolutely to agree with Councillor Taylor's point. You know, in Copmanthorpe, for example, we had a neighbourhood plan that's been worked on for well over a decade. It originally came in terms of very negative reasons to stop Councillor Merritt's local plan, I'm afraid to say, and it's evolved and got forgotten. But the neighbourhood plan has always, understandably, been the junior player at certain times to City of York's local plan, and Alison and team's only got so many hours in the day, and a statutory duty to assist that doesn't have any time frames and everything like that. So I think, you know, we've got to be very mindful of officer time. And if we don't have a time frame, SLA wise, it will always get forgotten. So I think the point about having some sort of SLA for how we as a city council should support neighbourhood plans is a really good and sensible recommendation, and I'll definitely support it, because from a parish council viewpoint, where you're doing the neighbourhood plan, it's a whole big undertaking, as Councillor Fisher has said. You know, there's the sort of money there. If you are a non-parished area, it's just a whole new set of challenges you're taking on if you're not sure when the City of York's time is going to be available. So I would definitely support a specific recommendation about having an SLA, and that's not for us to set that SLA here tonight, but I think it would be a good thing for us to have. I mean, Councillor Pavlik, if it's your area, what your sorts of thoughts are, because mindful of the fact that it's going to get forgotten local plan wise otherwise.
No, I certainly, I've heard everything that's been said. I think it's got a lot of merit. Councillor Merritt, no, pardon the pun. And we will talk about it with the director and with Alison as to how we can codify, if you like, the support that we can offer both parishes, the neighbourhood plans that are parished, and neighbourhood forums coming together. Whether it's an SLA, because you have to have an SLA with somebody, or a working model as to the support that could be offered. I think that's certainly something that we can talk about moving forward.
I'm just going to say, I mean, the big thing is time, because obviously at the moment we know what CYC will do, and that's all great. The big thing is when it will do it. So, it doesn't have to be an SLA, but nailing down the actual time that an entity can get that help, I think is the crucial point.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly, as it's been raised tonight, we'll certainly talk about it, and when we can report back via the chair to the members of the committee as to how we plan to move that forward. But I think it's a reasonable recommendation. I certainly have no problem with it, but we don't have the director here at the moment.
Yeah.
So let's look at it, and then we will feed back to you for members. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I had Councillor Fenton next.
Thank you. Just on the neighbourhood plan for non-parished areas, it may be as and when there's a community governance review, that may be something that can be picked up through that process. In terms of for non-parished areas such as the one I represent, it would be difficult to know where to start. But that's a sort of broader picture. In terms of the timelines in the paper, obviously there were discussions and decisions last year around prioritisation of supplementary planning documents, and the plan reflects the delivery of those that were prioritised. In terms of what happens to the SPDs that were sort of identified as lower priority, my reading of the plan is that once the current batch of SPDs are complete, resource then goes into the sort of visioning and production of the revised local plan. So the question is, what happens to the SPDs that we didn't prioritise? And chief among those, the sort of transport SPD, or will the movement and place plan become the SPD? So it'd be helpful to have some clarification around when we get to the end of the production of the prioritised SPDs, will there be any resource to then move on to the others that weren't prioritised?
Just to pick up on the transport SPD particularly, we have got a remit to produce a transport SPD as part of the movement and place plan, and I understand that's going ahead. We haven't included it in this timetable. At the moment, I don't have a timetable for production. That piece is being led by a transport team as part of movement in place, so it will track the progress of how we move forward with that strategy. But certainly, I can speak to colleagues to update the plan, the SPD plan in here, to see if there's now some key dates that we can aim to put in terms of an indicative timetable to pick up on the movement in place one. So apologies, that is the 6th prioritised SPD that's not represented.
And in terms of the others?
In terms of how we move forward, so we need to just see what the government have announced in terms of in terms of plan making and their intentions for the local plan. But certainly from the consultation material that we responded to previously, their intention is that the detail that would usually sit in an SPD to add clarity sits in the local plan, so it is one document. So there's a bit of contradiction, I would say, at the moment we need to work through, which is they want shorter local plans. So our local plan is over 300 pages, as you know, but they also want more detail in there in terms of how we're delivering it. So it might be that our traditional SPDs become annexes, for example, to the main document or policy. We would have to see what their intention is for how the document is actually produced. In terms of the lower level priority SPDs, I think at the moment we are only planning for those priority SPDs. When we get to the new plan making, anything that was identified as lower priority would still need to consider. And again, like I said, that detail would likely go into the new local plan policy.
Thanks. Councillor Vassy, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the addendum and paragraph 6. It makes reference to the word beautiful birds, beautiful places being replaced with well-designed places. And I'd just like a bit of information on that. I was alarmed when I was seeing a bureaucracy seeking to define something as a beautiful place. I don't think that's the role of bureaucracy at all. But well-designed place is also a potential pratfall for me. Do we have a definition in the NPPF of what a well-designed place is? And the reason I'm asking is that it could potentially be used to block innovation by implying that a building's environment makes it less appropriate for innovation to take place. Or we might find ourselves in a situation where the fact that we've got the poorest housing stock in Europe in terms of energy efficiency might suggest we ought to be trying new innovation and new building types, but a well-designed place might suggest that you can't put that there because it's inappropriate. So I'm just wanting to know if there is a definition and how that will impact going forwards on everything else we're doing.
So I think description of beautiful places and the word beauty had been quite controversial generally when it came in the NPPF about a year before it was taken out. So I think well-designed has been brought back in, so there's a push to get design codes in place in every authority, and there's a lot more. There's national design guides, national model design codes are all out there, so there is a lot more information about what good design, well-designed looks like. So I think the push is on for that, and the thought was that beauty was too subjective a term, whereas well-designed was something we could put numbers to effectively and therefore assess in a less subjective way. So hopefully no loss of quality, but something that we can assess more clearly.
And just to add to that, the starting point in the NPPF actually starts with the creation of high quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings and places is fundamental to what the planning and development process should achieve. So hopefully all the things you've been mentioning in terms of climate change adaptation, how we're delivering sustainable buildings is brought into that definition as well.
If I can respond, Chair. So we're not going to be having a part in setting out what those definitions are. But if a building comes to us that is a cedar-clad building, for example, in innovative construction, and the person wants to put it in a street full of brick buildings, are we going to find this concept of well-designed places mitigating against new design? Or are you confident that there will be opportunities for planning committees and planning officers to welcome in innovation?
I couldn't speak on behalf of our development management team, but certainly in terms of we would look at every we look at on a case by case basis in terms of the whole scheme and its setting and context in that, but certainly in terms of looking at innovation, etc., is something that we are encouraging, and particularly ensuring that we're delivering sustainable design and construction. And our climate change supplementary planning document will be setting out more about how we envisage that aligning, but that innovation certainly should be a consideration as part of that planning decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wren.
Thank you, Chair. It would have dovetailed better after Councillor Fenton, but I'll do that in terms of just coincidences. Having worked in this area for a particularly long time, long conversations about SPDs, long conversations about local plans, 30 months is obviously very, very optimistic in the first place. My concern is, and it's a question of you and Councillor Pavlovic as well, this is quite an ambitious timetable, I think, in many, many ways. Delivering a new local plan in 30 months, delivering 5 SPDs in 6 months. The questions that Councillor Fenton raised about those SPDs that aren't on there. So this committee, for example, was very keen on the culture SPD. Do we have anywhere near the capacity currently in the team to be able to deliver what's in this document? I suspect we don't. If not, are there plans in place to increase that capacity? And are we able to increase that capacity? Or do we realistically have to start thinking, what is the actual timetable? And I fully believe that those other SPDs we'll be lucky if we get these SPDs on this paper through by 27, I suspect. But I think that definitely does mean that the culture SPD, for example, and those other ones will never get looked at during that plan period. So do we need to reassess this timetable a little bit to be a bit more pragmatic? Do we need to encourage the executive to invest more in this particular area to make sure this gets through?
In terms of resourcing, we have the capacity to start, with the delivery and implementation of this adopted plan. So as part of that timetable, we're looking that, we've got the decision in place to proceed with our 6 priority SPDs, to move forward with our community infrastructure levy examination and get that adopted through the system. And that's partly the reason why we're also staggering the start of the plan making timetable. And if we can push, we've already said that we would align that to be with what the government is saying in terms of that, allowing as much front loading as possible in terms of not setting the clock running and triggering that 30-month event as far as possible. In terms of resourcing, when we come back with a future LDS, when we know what the actual legislative requirements are and what the document looks like and what the detail of it is, particularly taking into consideration what we'll understand from the National Development Management Policy, and what detail might come out of the plan, I'll be able to comment a bit further on that. And I'm certainly expecting the next local development scheme to have a resourcing plan supporting it in terms of how we move forward.
Thanks. Sorry, you wanted to come in, Councillor Pavlovic.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to confirm Alison's point is that she mentioned earlier that we are technically within the 5-year period, so the 30 months would start when we decide that we're going to trigger it, as long as it's within that 5-year period. And the importance of getting SIL and those priority SPDs are where we feel that the focus should be. But Councillor Ray is absolutely right. Resourcing is a significant issue, and therefore, when you have limited resources, you have to prioritise what you can deliver and what's going to have, not to put too fine a point on it, the biggest bang for the buck. And for us at the moment, that is getting SIL across the line and getting those the climate change and the housing SPDs in particular done and agreed.
Thanks. I had a couple of questions. One of them was on timescales. Actually, it was just to get a view from you. Obviously, the timescales are quite short, especially from the inspector for when new plans are being done in terms of those consultation periods and especially for the review. Do we get the impression that we're expecting them to be more bullish in terms of how they dictate local plans and the responses that they put back to us? Because I feel it's gone through various iterations previously and lots of review and discussion. We expect it to be a little bit more clear cut. Is that the vibe, I guess, we're getting from government.
Yes, certainly with the gateway processes. So I think what they're trying to eliminate is a lot of discussion at examination focuses on need assessment, and obviously we need to determine our needs almost before we flow into how we allocate spatially to meet those needs. And the gateway process that the government want to bring in, the intention behind that is to box off certain issues right at the beginning of the process so that we have a clear movement forward and a basis on which to plan, and then instead of and then having these intermittent gateway processes, the one in the middle is to make sure we're on track, we're not being that we're legally compliant, that the approach we're taking is sound against the government guidance, to enable a shorter examination period at the end, rather than obviously that's compared to our recent experience of 6 years, which they want to bring that down to 6 months in total. And I think that gateway process is pivotal in terms of how the government are trying to speed up that process. And we know that they're trying to resource the planning inspectorate and gear the planning inspector up and their inspectors to follow that process as well.
Thanks. So is that a supplementary, Councillor Merritt?
So how will conflicts over the needs assessment evidence be addressed? In effect, that will be a decision without public examination. So there's conflicting views.
So my understanding is that that there'll be almost like possibly mini examinations as part of that gateway process. So to determine, so the inspectors will, I imagine, give us a decision on how to progress, but based upon any engagement and any relevant engagement that we've had and undertaken, including any conflicting views, and come to a view for us to move forward.
Thanks.
So how will parties outside the council and stakeholder arrangements know the needs assessment and be able to comment, or they won't?
Just going back to the note that we've circulated, the information we have at the moment is we've definitely got to undertake 2 periods of public consultation. And I imagine the first will include information around the needs assessment and being able to comment on that from a public perspective.
Thanks. Councillor Stewart, do you have a question on that, or has that been answered? You can go. I don't think there's anyone else.
Thank you. Just related to sort of duty to cooperate with other authorities, and is there any particular change mayoral wise? The fact obviously we've got a mayor, does that make it, or does the mayor just crop up in terms of the sort of number 15 that they would be a local body?
So the mayoral combined authority, at the moment, we know that they have a duty through the National Planning Policy Framework to produce a spatial development plan, a spatial development strategy of their own that covers York and North Yorkshire. The details of which we've only got slight details of that at the moment, but effectively there will be a plan from the mayor setting out spatially their intentions that we would need to take into account, and hopefully that will be running alongside our timetable for production so that we can make sure that that's included. In terms of the certain public bodies to assist, I think that's going into, at the moment, we have statutory bodies in terms of statutory bodies that we need to consult with. So Historic England, Environment Agency, and those bodies. At the moment, we consult them. I think what the government are trying to do is make it more proactive in terms of their engagement with us, to give them more an active role in making sure they actually assist us in our plan making, so that we're not chasing them for a response or just awaiting responses during consultation periods. So I think it's changing that relationship with our current statutory bodies.
So thanks very much. Yeah, no, that's fine. So just on the mayor, do they trump us in terms of if they want something and we don't, or do we work together with them closely and everything's perfect, or
I'll certainly be looking to work with the mayor in terms of their spatial plan. They have a remit that they can set spatial priorities for their area. So we need to work closely with them to make sure that we inform what those are, and work to them when they're delivered in their plan. So they'll be similarly to, not to go back to regional spatial strategies, but it's a similar function to that, where we will need to be in strategic conformity with the mayoral plan.
Councillor Merritt, do you still want to come in there?
The power that the mayors will have on spatial strategies, is that something that is in the existing devolution agreements, or is this something that will come out of the proposed legislation next year? And therefore, will this all be an informal setup beforehand? And if so, have there been any discussions with the CA at this point in terms of them being able to meet the timescale to match your proposed review?
We're in conversation with the mayoral team at the moment and North Yorkshire, looking for governance arrangements and making sure that we have that strategy due to cooperate and working arrangements for that. In terms of the remit of the mayoral combined authority, it wasn't an original remit of our mayoral combined authority, but it is something new that the government have introduced through their planning, their new planning infrastructure bill, that this is a remit for all mayoral combined authorities to produce a spatial development strategy for their areas.
That was in the planning and infrastructure bill that's already been passed.
That's correct.
Yes, right.
Yes.
As opposed to a new one.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. We've still got the recommendation to vote on, which is to approve the interim local government scheme. I just want to know, sorry, come to you, Councillor.
On the recommendations.
Yes, yeah. So, but I would just note, I think we will, it's a not a minor recommendation, but an additional recommendation to that, which seems to be supported, which is just this one for the exec member and the director to take away this discussion about how we codify local neighbourhood plans as part of that. I'm not seeing any dissent to that being added on, I don't think, so I think we'll just include that within the recommendation. In that, taken with the recommendation that's within the report, we'll see those who are happy to vote for that. I would like to mention something, please do.
Yeah, I think it probably leads into the conversation you're going to have later on about the point of this group. And I think we have had this conversation before. And I think probably this group predates most people, apart from perhaps myself, Councillor Merritt, Councillor, or perhaps Councillor Vassy as well. This group has never approved or done anything. It's not our remit to approve anything. So I would not support the recommendation on this. I have issues with the timeline. I have issues with lots of different bits and pieces. The purpose of this group was always just to have a free and open cross-party discussion about any issues, an opportunity to, on very complicated issues with very experienced officers, to get a lot of information, a lot of questions about things. And then if we wanted to make recommendations to executive as to anything they should consider when they come to the approving and the amending is the executive decision. I think we have come up with one particular thing that we want to pass to the executive. But other than that, I think the only time we've ever taken votes, generally, it's just a consensus agreement of, are we happy to recommend that to the executive? But we never generally take a vote unless there is really massive disagreement across the table about that. But approving and amending isn't in our remit. It's just a case of saying, well, these are the views of the group to the executive. We certainly want some things adding. There's some concerns raised about various different issues, and then it's for the executive to either approve or amend.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this did come up at the last meeting, actually, exactly the same discussion about what that stands at. And looking back through the papers, to consider in their recommendation is to support or not, but it doesn't actually ask for a formal vote either, I don't think. So, I mean, I don't know if people feel, do you feel there is a need for a formal vote to support this today, or is it just for us to advise? I guess that's the question, which we've done in terms of the recommendation to take away. Councillor Pavlovich, you want to come in?
Yeah, the reason it's come is because there were concerns about timescales, about reviews. It was the right thing it was, in my opinion, it was the right thing to bring a paper forward. We have now brought it forward. We've now consulted on it with you. Therefore, we'll take it forward to executive to approve the interim. And it is an interim, and it will come back, and it will have subsequent iterations of it, which we will again bring back to local plan working group.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, please do.
It was just complete to support that, and I'm fully in favour. That's why we did it, is to make sure that we have this forum to have these discussions, but not for it to turn into a binary thing of people being tied to, because then people will stop, and it will stop us be able to have a proper free conversation. So fully support the bringing of as many papers as possible and as much opportunity to talk about them as possible. But it's just that binary yes, no makes us draw lines that we don't need to have.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, Councillor Merritt.
Just on a point of history, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying now, Nigel, but certainly in the early years before 2014, when I ceased to be involved, it certainly was a voting process and voting and amendment process. It was very different in those days, but I'm not disagreeing with operating it in the way you suggest now.
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, in that case, I mean, we'll take forward the recommendation that we have around neighbourhood plans, but otherwise, I'll spare everyone's arms. Keep them down for the time being. And we'll move on to, so thank you for that. And we'll move on to the next item, which is item 6, which is the Murton neighbourhood plan. Examiners wrote a decision statement. If you could present anything on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. My colleague John Roberts is going to introduce this item for you.
Thank you, Alison. Hello, members. Just to advise you on the progress of the neighbourhood plan. The Murton neighbourhood plan has been through examination on the submitted version of the plan, which is in the report Annex A. This report presents the conclusions of the examination and the inspector's report, which is Annex B in this report, and recommends members endorse the examiner's recommendations to enable the plan to proceed to referendum as set out in the decision statements, which is Annex C. Paragraph 19 of the report sets out the recommendations for tonight. The plan was prepared by Murton Parish Council with engagement from the local community and City of York Council. Prior to examination, it's been through various stages of production, which is set out in paragraph 20 of this report. Andrew Ashcroft was the examiner appointed to undertake the examination. The purpose of the examination is to consider whether the plan complies with various legislative requirements and meets the basic conditions as set out in the relevant legislation. He concluded in his report that, subject to modifications proposed in his report, the neighbourhood plan meets the basic conditions and the neighbourhood plan should proceed to referendum. He also added that the plan is a good example of a neighbourhood plan. It includes a variety of policies and seeks to bring forward positive and sustainable developments in the neighbourhood area. Subject to executive decision next week to endorse the conclusions of the report, the council must organise a referendum into the neighbourhood plan. This ensures that the community have the final say in whether the plan comes to force or not. The regulations require that the local planning authority has to hold a referendum within 56 days of the date of decision, i.e. the date of the executive next week. This excludes weekends and bank holidays. So basically that means a referendum will need to take place before the 14th of July this year. We will publicise the date of that in due course once that's been confirmed. If over 50% of the voters in the referendum say yes to the neighbourhood plan, then according to legislation, we must bring forward the plan in force within 8 weeks of the referendum, unless there are legal challenges to it, of course. If the referendum results say yes, a further report will be brought to executive with regard to the formal adoption of the plan in due course. Thank you.
Thanks. That's great. Yes, similar to the last one, this is going to executive next week, but we're asked if there's any additional observations that we'd like to raise to executives this time. Is there anything that members would like to ask or raise at this point? Otherwise, we'll just recommend it to, Councillor Whitcroft will just recommend it.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate I'm a substitute for this committee, but I just wanted to check in terms of consultation and representation. We didn't have any public speakers come in at the start of the meeting. We haven't heard from either ward member of this ward. We haven't heard from the parish council, for example. Were they encouraged to come and speak to this committee, or is that not necessarily something that would normally happen? Or is there any way we could perhaps encourage more local democracy people coming to the committee to engage? Because this is an important thing that we're doing for Murton. It'd be good to hear from them.
Certainly through the consultation following prior to the examination of the plan, we encouraged all participation from members. It was a citywide consultation. Anyone could address that. In terms of, I can't comment as to why or why not somebody hasn't turned up to support the item, but certainly the impression we've been given is that there's support all round for the item to come forward as a plan for the parish.
Yeah, Councillor Pavlovich, if you want to come in.
Thank you. Again, this is a footnote. This will go to executive next week. I just want to thank the officers for the time that they've put into this. I also want to thank those involved in Murton, who I know have spent a great deal of time working on this. Perhaps somebody will speak next week at executive, maybe not. But you know, as we've heard already, preparing a neighbourhood plan is it's a long, involved process that requires great dedication from many residents who are committed to the process. And I would just like to put on record my thanks to all of them and to all of the residents that do get involved in preparing neighbourhood plans across the city.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a welcome contribution. Councillor Merritt, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I noted John's comment and the one in the paper that the inspector said it was a very good plan, and then rewrote virtually every single recommendation in it. It's but anyway, it's just a little bit of light entertainment.
Yeah, they do. In terms of the recommendations they make, they do make quite a lot of changes to the neighbourhood plans anyway. A lot of it's just minor tweaking of them. There's nothing usually that's fundamental, but usually it's just tweaking the wording to make it clearer. But he did say that it was a well-written neighbourhood plan.
Thanks. Yeah, Councillor Bassey, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have a question about the referendum and the mechanics of this. I think we've all come to realise in the past few years that there are referendums and referendums. And what interests me here is obviously to support a local community to create and adopt a vision that they want to have. But what processes and regulations inform who that electorate is, how much of that electorate has to vote for a plan to be adopted? Are there any rules in plan? Could it be that just 10% of people vote and it's considered to have been the view of the community that they wanted something? Because we talked earlier about the imperative that local authorities listen to local communities. For that to have substance, I hope we'd all agree that if only 10% of people vote for something to be adopted, there can be legitimate questions as to whether the neighbourhood has actually supported something or not. So I'd just like to better understand what is meant by a referendum and who that electorate is.
The requirements of the referendum are just defined in legislation, and it is simply that we send out a voting paper to everybody in that neighbourhood plan area who lives in that neighbourhood plan area that's on the electoral roll. and they get their vote, and it's a simple majority of the people that vote in that election, in that referendum, that decides it, and it is all defined, so it's not something we can play with at all.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, because I couldn't see it in the regulations. And I would just note my caution about how this will function. I hope it will function well. I hope everyone will participate. And I suppose we have a part to play in making sure that happens.
Councillor Pavlovich, want to say something?
Yes, it's dangerous territory, Councillor Vassie, in saying that you want significant majorities. You know, the next local elections might certainly give you pause for thought on legitimacy. But certainly, I know that there is a very engaged community in Murton. They have been very involved in writing this, and I'm sure that there'll be a great deal of work done by those people that have contributed in making sure that there is a good turnout.
Yeah, thanks.
So I can't predict what that turnout will be.
No, we won't ask for bets. Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing any further hands. I don't think there's a need for a vote by ourselves, and I'm not seeing any specific additional recommendations or observations for us to give. So we'll just take that as being recommended to progress to executive next week. Let's progress. Urgent business was item 7. All I wanted to raise on this, a number of people have contacted me. Councillor Vassie, you emailed last week around, I guess, what the purpose of the committee is, and especially in the process of, as we progress towards SPDs, what the role of the committee is in terms of influencing SPDs, engaging at the right time rather than it just coming at the end of the decision-making process. So I know I've had a discussion with you, Alison. From my point of view, I've had a discussion with yourself, and I'm planning to have further conversations with the leader around this. I don't want to open up the floor fully for input at this point, but I'd say I'll ask you to contribute in a second, Alison. But if anyone has any thoughts on what they think they would like to see, then welcome to contact me, email me, speak to me about what you think is the right way to do it, and then I can feed that on. Because for me, I think last time we had the MPPF discussion was quite productive in terms of people being into input at a stage before a decision-making discussion. But there's been other times where things often come at the end of there, and it's kind of opportunity to input, but perhaps it's a little bit too late. And also, question about the size of the committee, but everything else, anything that people would like to input, then that's welcome and it can be fed back. But yeah, Alison, I don't know if you want to say anything more specifically about how you would just imagine it'll work with SPD development and how you'd like to happen.
Certainly, I find the feedback from the group very helpful in terms of proceeding, in terms of the discussion that we've been having, such as today. So the intention from my part with SPD production is to bring a draft SPD ahead of an executive with a longer timescale between local plan working group and executive, so that we can implement any contribution from the group prior to taking a decision as to whether to consult or adopt or what have you, whichever stage we're in, so that we allow that time period and we can have this helpful discussion.
Thanks. Councillor Pavlovich.
Yeah, and the whole idea of having local plan working group, which I think has been a historic one, really close to the exec meeting, means that there isn't that opportunity to input and to contribute. So by having a bigger gap, it will allow for comments to be then incorporated into the final document that comes to executive.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. And Councillor Vassie, because you emailed previously, if you want to raise something now, then please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your comments. Yes, I came out of the pleasure of us adopting our local plan, thinking about where do we go next, and we had a meeting with the Planning Advisory Board service where they set out and explained some of the opportunities that SPDs provide to give legs to the ambition of the local plan. And it's certainly my view that the local authorities I've worked with in any capacity across Europe that succeed are ones that maximize the consensus across the entire political spectrum to give clarity to officers about long-term plans and long-term direction. And on this kind of an issue, this is plainly one par excellence where that clarity of medium-term and long-term thinking in the political class can help to inform and shape things. And I'll just give one example because it really crystallized it for me. And it's about sustainable construction and how all of those of us who sit in planning meetings and have heard over and over how we have an ambition to achieve a 35% cut in emissions compared to 2012 in such and such a project, if it's possible, and are then told it's not possible, and then we all walk away sadly and think, well, we couldn't get there. I'll just read you two short paragraphs from Richmond's in London, way that they handle that. So the first one is, major residential developments, 10 units or more, should achieve zero carbon standards in line with the London plan. A zero carbon home is one where at least 35% of regulated CO2 emissions are achieved on site, with the remaining emissions up to 100% to be offset through a contribution to the council's carbon offset fund. The council has adopted the London plan price of carbon, which is £60 per tonne, for 30 years, equaling £1,800 per tonne of carbon. Zero carbon standards will apply to major non-residential schemes from 2019, and development, where development viability is concerned, affordable housing will be prioritised over zero carbon contributions. That's basically saying that if a development says, well, we can't do it on this site, the council simply says, that's all right, we've calculated how much you've not delivered, and you will pay £1,800 per tonne. And that money will then be used to retrofit council homes and council buildings and make improvements elsewhere. And the second short paragraph is for smaller developments. The council recognises there may be instances where it's not technically feasible for a development to achieve a 35% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions over Building Regulations 2013. In such cases, an applicant will have to demonstrate and set out clearly in their energy statement why the carbon dioxide emissions reduction target cannot be met. Any shortfall in on-site reductions can exceptionally be met through a cash-in-lieu contribution to the council's carbon offset fund, agreed through a Section 106 agreement in line with planning obligations, SPDs. And for me, it's the mechanics of that I hope will eventually enable this city to ensure that every single development contributes to cutting carbon emissions. And that's why I approached you, Chair, and thank you for raising the issue of the absolute importance of SPDs and the key role that all of us can play going forwards in giving real legs to our local plan. I'm happy if officers want to say that I'm misunderstanding it, or whether you think it's a useful thing that we could be doing, with your permission, Chair.
You're welcome to add anything if you'd like.
Just to reiterate that the supplementary planning documents will have to clarify our own local plan policy. So although you've given a lot of detail there, there'll be policies in place where that's adding detail to those policies that they've adopted as part of their plan. So just to expect that our SPDs will focus on the policies that we've got locally, but certainly I've written down that as an example to have a look at as part of our preparation for that.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll pick that up in future sessions, but I just wanted to make sure that was raised in any of urgent business. So yeah, thanks for your time today, John and Alison's, and thanks for everyone else's time. And bye.